we had to have this car.
We had to have another mid-engine car.
Yes, and the Toyota MR2 Spyder is completely in the middle of what we're talking about.
Why did they build this car?
It is weird, isn't it?
Why
it
did they
seems
build
like a
this?
really strange thing. Toyota had been building the MR2. This was the third gen.
Yeah.
So it was the third gen of their mid-engine
car. I know it was
car,
the next generation,
but
the next
the only
thing.
full dedicated Spyder of that idea. They had two with the target tops before that. Then they made this car, and it didn't sell that well, and I think it gets overlooked and forgotten, and I'm so glad we have it as part of it.
But I ask because the third generation, you'd think by the third gen, things get bigger, more powerful, faster, more sorted. They went the other direction.
Yes. They just were like, you know what we should do?
It's the weirdest thing.
Yes, agreed.
They went to a plumbing shop to get the door handles.
They did. That does look like that was a Home Depot discount, doesn't it? Yeah.
You're watching Everyday Driver. We make a TV show, podcast,
and YouTube channels helping you find a car you'll love.
This is our second Cheap Car Challenge, and with the help of Auto Tempest, we're doing a year of adventures in $7,500 sports cars.
Subscribe so you don't miss a thing.
But the thing is, it's 2,200 pounds.
It's 200 pounds lighter than the Miata.
Yes. Also a 1.8 liter though, and making very low horsepower.
It also is the lowest power here, 138 horsepower, 125 pound-feet of torque.
It's not a lot.
It's both lighter and less powerful than the Miata. What's interesting is it's faster than the Miata 0 to 60 because it doesn't weigh anything.
Right. Well, this particular example has just been driven, and I'm glad we've got it because that does push it under our $8,000 price cap.
Yep.
And you might not have remembered that these things exist. Heck, I forgot Toyota still built them, but you're right, they didn't sell very well because I think they weren't the next generation. You know, the next thing needs to be bigger, better, faster, hotter, whatever, to really get customers. And here's Toyota just doing a driver's car, just distilling everything down to purity, lightweight. There's no dead spot in the steering. There's nothing there. It is superb.
Is it possible that Toyota was copying off of Porsche's paper?
It is absolutely possible.
This even looks like the Boxster.
It does. Well, it's not nearly as pretty.
It's not as attractive.
It looks like the Boxster for architecture.
But even like the headlights looking a little bit weird on the shape and everything like that, it looks like somebody was making the low-priced Boxster as far as styling is concerned. It isn't as successful. I know you're not going to agree with me. It isn't successful, but it feels like somebody was like with binoculars looking at what Porsche was doing from Toyota and scribbling things down. But the result is very good.
It is. I'm surprised that I kind of like it, to be honest, but maybe I shouldn't be because, you know, we both love the mid-engine thing so much. It really rotates well. This also feels like a car that isn't going to bite you, but that's by virtue of low power, and it doesn't have, you know, the EVS brakes or the tightest suspension. It's just pure fun driving. But that's why this is such a contender.
Well, and
we cannot ignore this car.
With that mid-engine architecture, it creates that scenario where it's not going to be as forgiving as the Miata. If you really pushed it hard, but in this, I'm on a canyon road, it's just easy.
I'd say it's not going to be as forgiving as the Porsche either. There's going to be more you'll like about the Porsche because they tend to look at everything, whereas this just feels like Toyota doing its lightweight thing. I can't explain why they built this car.
They made something wonderfully cheap.
What was the business case?
Fun. I agree with you. It's very surprising.
It's so small, and of all the cars here, you know how we're talking about modding? I don't think anybody mods this thing. It's not the platform to start with.
You can certainly...
So you buy it and just drive it.
You can certainly find them modded, and the mods always look like I had to cobble this together because who is supporting this car mod-wise? But what's crazy is, at under 10 grand, and even under the 8 that we've got here, there's a lot of these out there. And there have been for years. People have just forgotten these cars exist, and it is the cheap way to buy into mid-engine, even more so than the Boxster.
It looks cheap, it feels cheap, but you know, that's part of its charm in a weird way. It's loud in here, but you're hearing nothing of the engine.
No, not at all.
Mind you, you don't want to. This is not the beautiful engine note that you want to hear. But this is just fun little driving, and that input, the steering input, that's the joy about this car.
Well, but I also wonder if Toyota, this engine is related to the engine in my Lotus Elise.
Am I in 5th? I'm already in 5th?
I believe so,
There's no more gears? What?
This engine is related to the 4-cylinder that's in my Lotus Elise.
No kidding.
In the early 2000s, Lotus changed from a Rover motor to this Toyota motor, and then they changed it up some.
Right,
okay?
right.
And I wonder if that conversation of Toyota talking to Lotus about putting this engine, a variant of this engine in the Lotus, if that got Toyota thinking about, let's do something a little different. Let's go super lightweight. Let's focus. Let's do a different MR2.
Do you mean to be able to support other car companies buying their engines?
No, I'm just wondering if they were thinking about what the next MR2 going to be like, and along comes Lotus to use this engine in their Lotus Elise, and they just thought, what if we made it more like the Elise? I wonder if that was part of the thinking.
Maybe,
Don't know.
maybe.
But that might explain the fact that this is a strange left turn from the two MR2s prior, which also were small and also were mid-engine. But this is just that we're going to lean into Spyder. We're going to do something that looks a little bit like we're looking at Porsche, a little bit like we're looking at Lotus.
Yeah.
And they made a completely unique animal.
It is unique, but the first two generations of the MR2 looked way better than this.
It's not attractive.
It's not.
It's
Nothing
not
about it
attractive,
is. It's very slab and brutal, and Toyota trying to find their voice, trying to find themselves, and they didn't, and they just stopped.
It's got a frog face and a very cheap feeling interior.
It does.
But it is back to, we've been talking a lot in this discussion about when a car is distilling down the driving, and this has done that very well.
The shifter is pretty good. The clutch engagement, pretty good. The brakes, they don't need to stop hardly anything.
Yeah.
And the suspension isn't soft because the car never weighs enough for a car to get soft. So it just feels right still.
Well, you have that same thing as the Lotus Elise, where you're just not going to have consumables because there's not enough weight to burn stuff out.
So maybe that's the good thing. You'll never wear this car out, so you can just keep driving on all the same clutch and brakes and suspension.
It cheap, keep it cheap, drive it cheap. Toyota MR2 Spyder.
There is that.
There
it
we
does
go.
have that going for it.
All right, I need to drive. I'm excited.
You do. Smash.
Doesn't sound good low.
Nothing about this car sounds good. See, this is not the car you want to hear. No, it sounds like
I'm wondering if that engine always sounds that way, or if that's just this one. That is surprisingly thrashy.
I've heard snowmobiles and lawnmowers.
It is in that range.
Weed
It
whackers.
is in that range, yes.
Blowers.
And also the interesting thing about this
Roadsters.
the interesting thing about this 1.8
Blenders.
liter, you can stop now. Some of those have bigger engines than this
They
too.
do.
This
They sound
1.8
better.
liter, besides not sounding great, it's a little sluggish initially. Now once you get it above
A little?
Well, but it's
a little sluggish.
I just
a little sluggish.
The car doesn't need power to go quickly because it weighs so little. And I'm not making a comment on the fact that it doesn't have much horsepower, because it doesn't. But the point I'm making is the engine just feels like it'd rather not be bothered for the first 3,500 RPM. It just kind of wishes you wouldn't.
Yeah, okay.
After about 3,500 RPM, it starts to pick up a little bit of, okay, all right, I guess I'm awake. We'll do something now.
Are we doing anything?
Apparently we're doing this.
Oh, you're going to pass this guy?
I'm going to pass him. I'm going to go for it.
Ballsy.
I am.
I'm just going to hold on
I'm dedicating myself to it.
I'm going to hold on to the plumbing.
There's 5,000. All right, we got it. We made it. We're good.
You're in last gear, by the way.
I am in last gear.
No more gears for you.
Yep, fifth gear. We're very much in fifth.
Just hang on to the plumbing and you're good. There's a surprising amount of room over here.
Yep. Hey, honestly,
good passenger
as far as leg room and shoulder room, it's pretty good. It's not quite as tight for headroom as the Miata. It's a little tight for headroom in here.
It's like Economy Plus. About the same leg room.
But the air is going over the top of my head.
Doesn't itch in the knees. Unfortunately, there's no drinks on this flight, no peanuts, nothing.
You didn't work hard enough for first class. We're going to close the curtain.
If only you worked hard enough. Swish.
Yes. Before this car, I'd only ever driven one of these MR2 Spyders once. And it was about a decade ago, and I drove it because I was considering buying one.
How'd your decade go?
And I remember pretty well. I remember scaring the salesperson because I went out in a mid-engine car and I drove it hard.
Yeah.
And I remember them being a little freaked out by it.
Well, that's what you're supposed to do.
Exactly. But I was also thinking about wanting to actually drive this car for fun, so I was driving it fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I didn't remember it feeling this light. This is really light.
We're getting after it.
We are, for sure.
We're feeling the characteristics, and that's why we chose this road.
This is absolutely an alternate for somebody that thinks, I can't afford a Lotus Elise, and I don't want a Porsche Boxster, and I don't know if I can afford the maintenance.
Why would you
I'd like
not want a
something
Porsche Boxster?
in that vein. That's something that someone other than me will have to explain to you, Paul. I'm
Don't
sorry
get it.
that you're lost on that.
Don't get it.
If you weren't going to buy one of those two, but you want something in that vein, this is absolutely along those lines.
Yeah.
And I think it is
interesting.
sadly overlooked, and I'm amazed they are as cheap as they are. I found decent ones of this on Auto Tempest for as low as $5,000, $6,000. Now, when you compare that to that $5,000 Z3 we had, which looked harsh, I'm amazed at how much car you get for this at $5,000. But it's overlooked, man. It's overlooked.
It is, but the good part about being overlooked is that it's never going to pop up on people's radar.
Yeah, well, maybe
Nobody's
it will
just
now.
going to discover it. Well,
Maybe,
I suppose,
yeah,
but
possibly.
nobody's going to discover it and be like, we've been missing this the whole time.
Yeah,
and suddenly,
fair.
we need to go buy one. Because you're not putting parts on this. You're not pouring money into this. Admittedly, like you would a Boxster.
Well, yes.
Admittedly, like you would a Miata, like you will with your 350Z. You just buy this and drive it, barely maintain it, and it'll keep running because it's a Toyota.
You keep polishing that Toyota badge and parking it.
And just drive it everywhere. But this does beg to be driven on a road like this.
Yes.
There's just not the next level of this car.
True.
A couple of the cars there is here,
Yeah.
but for this one, you're still going to be at the back of the pack. You're still, well, yeah, back.
But I think this is a car where if you want a Miata alternative and you do want a car you can track with abandon, I think this is a worthwhile alternative. You don't want a Miata, but you want to run with those guys on a track day, go get this car. I think it's going to run like crazy. Now, they are going to have a lot of aftermarket stuff they can throw at theirs you might not be able to find for this.
Yeah.
That is an issue. But if you're talking about you just want a fun track car and you don't want a Miata, you could buy this. And
change your tires.
Of course.
And this will grip hard.
And it does already. I mean, these are older tires on this, a little older than we like, to be honest. And it still feels great. And I love the fact that you are getting bargain basement mid-engine rotation out of this, and the steering. Honestly, there's not a lot of information, but the steering is light, the car feels light, and there's a ton of car feel.
There is, and I have to admit, I am having fun, and I do like this car. I just think it's ugly, and there's other cars I would choose. But I have to admit, you gotta look at this. If you just want pure distilled driving pleasure, and that's all.
It's way up there.
You
for
don't
me
want
in that.
anything else, and you don't need anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I've answered my own question. But why doesn't Toyota continue to build little things like this?
Agreed. This needs to come back. I drive this, and I really think, Toyota is having a resurgence right now in sports cars.
Oh, yeah.
With the FRS 86 that they took and now are making a second gen, which I'm thrilled they're doing.
We need a mid-engine car again.
They've brought the Supra about. This should come back.
Yeah.
What if this showed up between the two in price? 30, 35, maybe 40 if you load it out. The Supra's above it. This is where this goes.
That with a cheap Boxster, those two together.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a good matchup right there. And I love that we're just constantly in search of that purity.
Well, but we want sports cars to thrive and live on.
Yeah.
With this gathering, it's awesome to put these cars together and find out what older cars can give you in value.
Yeah.
But we can't help but think, what if they made it now? And what if they were making new ones? And I do think of all the cars we've driven, this is one of the ones that I think is the most compelling at the price, because you're the least worried about the reliability.
Yeah.
And you
might not never change the oil.
Whatever. The last owner may have been like, I don't know, I just started it. I mean, that literally might be his entire description of what it was like to own it. I don't know. I never changed the oil, never changed the tires, started it, turned it off, drove it with the top down. That's all it does. So you have that security because it's a Toyota product, but then you get that somewhat exotic rotation feel because it's mid-engine. This makes this really compelling and surprising.
I agree. I wanted to not like it. I wanted to. I still want to.
You want to not like it because it's the unattractive bargain basement Boxster, and that offends you.
It offends me.
That's why.
I am angry.
You can't help yourself. It's still good.
It's still good. Much to my chagrin. My utter chagrin. It's still good. Except I don't like the plumbing.
I understand. These handles actually are the thing that's actually dated the interior the most. That and these super chrome surrounds that look like they're also out of a bathroom. That's really taking this simple interior and making it look like discount aisle stuff.
What if we put a giant screen in this? Would that help?
No, it wouldn't.
That
it really wouldn't.
it right up.
Yeah. Pop this up. Mount a screen in there. Just mount a screen right there. That's what we need to do.
Yes. I like that. See?
We're fixing things. We're solving Toyota's problems they didn't even know they had. That's what they need. They need us and a new MR2 Spyder.
Yes, the biggest one is to bring this car back.
Yes, for sure.
Clearly.
Do your own $7,500 or less search. Click the Auto Tempest link in the video description and tell us in the comments what you've come up with.